and welcome to the Design Rescue Show, where we take a behind-the-scenes look at the unique journeys of creative professionals, and we learn about the choices they've made that have shaped their career paths. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am your host, David Block, and with me today, I've got a guest named Dana Hursey. Dana is a professional photographer and an instructor at the ArtCenter College of Design. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is my pleasure.
Excellent. Well, the whole point of this series is really to show your career journey, really to take our viewers on sort of a behind the scenes tour of how you made it to where you are today. And so let's just jump right into it. I have my first question ready to go, going all the way back to your time as a student at the Art Center. I'm curious, did your interest in photography, did that lead you to Art Center, or did you actually gain that interest while you were there?
No, yeah, I definitely went in there very intentionally. My stepdad was an avid photographer and did a lot of editorial work when we were first when I was a kid. So my stepdad always had his camera in hand, and so that really was the impetus for me. I thought I was going to go into a completely different profession when I was in high school. Never thought I didn't even really want to go to college. And an instructor in my high school told me about Art Center. And that's like, hey, you just go, you take photo classes. You don't have to take any general ed or anything. It's just studio classes, which was totally not true. I think he did it with the best of intentions. I don't think he realized, but you have to get a full, general ed education when you go there. But for me, I just went to Art Center. I lived down in the Torrance area, Southern California, what they call the South Bay, and came up to Pasadena to do a tour of the campus just to check it out. And I walked through the gallery doors and I was sold instantly. I saw what was hanging on the wall there and put two and two together that people are actually making a living doing this kind of work. And so from that point on, it's like, nope, this is where I'm going. I subsequently found out you had to do your full general ed. And at that point, it's like, I don't care, I'm going here. So it really was a love at first sight thing for me.
Fantastic. So were there any challenges that you faced during your time in college? So anything that helped to shape your approach to photography?
Yeah, absolutely. When I walked through the doors as a first-term student there, I went in absolutely planning on being a product studio photographer. I was going to shoot tabletop things on a tabletop.
Right.
And, at the time, the curriculum was such that you really were forced through your 8 terms there to shoot everything. You had, there was very little that I didn't have to shoot at one point or another. And around 4th term, we had a portraiture class, and it was a full 14 weeks of having to shoot various portraits. And what I realized through that class was that the reason I wanted to be a product photographer is because I was petrified of having somebody in front of my lens, where, certainly at that stage, so I had shot with a 35 millimeter film camera, all of my teens, and didn't have an issue with that. But at the time we were shooting with medium and large format cameras, analog. And I realized it's like, oh, wait a minute, I've got to sit here and make sure that I know what I'm doing. I have to look like I know what I'm doing and kind of entertain the person in front of the camera while I get my act together. And so I realized that I was petrified of that process. But being forced to go through that process, I fell in love with it. So I always say I went into Art Center going to be a product photographer, and I came out of Art Center shooting fashion. By the time I was in 8th term, I walked out of there thinking that was the genre that I was going to focus on, which seems to be most people's landing spot is, oh, I want to be a fashion photographer. But I really did travel the whole journey of going from still life to shooting a lot of people. And it really certainly opened up my world, being forced to shoot a little bit of everything.
Excellent. So when were going to the art center, did you have any opportunities to get into commercial photography while going there, or did you actually have to wait till you graduated, and then was that where it all started for you?
Certainly you can go out and schlep your wares while you're there, and people did. So some colleagues of mine that were a term or two ahead of me were getting agents, and they were getting editorial gigs while they were still in class, and so the opportunity was absolutely there. I did, to supplement my going to school there, because it was and is pricey. I used to shoot a lot of basically copy work. I earned a fair amount of money and became very proficient at shooting copy work for the other students there, because they had illustration students and fine art students and advertising students and graphic design students who needed their projects recorded. And at the time, that was the way to do it, was to photograph it, and that became part of their portfolio. So that was kind of my foray into for-profit photography while I was there. Certainly, everybody's got a different path throughout their career. And when I graduated, I had an opportunity to go out and studio manage for two photographers. It really started out as one photographer, and he was a fashion photographer here in LA. And so I became his studio manager. I had other skills that made me a great prospect for that. I come from a long line of business owners, entrepreneurs, and so I had a pretty decent background in accounting and bookkeeping. And so I got brought into this studio because I was very adept at that, and I could basically keep the books and run the studio. One thing I am is very anal, retentive, organized, very structured. So I was able to land that gig, and that was a really great experience. Now, while I was there, I was kicking myself constantly because I saw fellow graduates out there doing it, actually opening their own studio and getting going. And so I was kicking myself going, but I'm kind of stuck here in this studio managing position. And it was interesting because I did that for 2 years. And over the course of those 2 years, my colleagues more and more were reaching out to me for advice on the business end of it, the back end. Yeah, we know how to take pictures. We don't know how to do anything else. It is an area that has quite often lacked certainly at ArtCenter at the time, but other art schools where they teach you the craft, but they don't teach you the business. Right. And so what I was learning those 2 years was how to run a business. And quite frankly, I actually teach that course at ArtCenter now. That is what I am currently teaching in the curriculum, is, for lack of a better word, the business of photography.
Right.
And what I tell my students is, at ArtCenter, 98% of what they're teaching you is the craft of photography, and maybe 5% of what they teach you is the business of photography. And when you step out the door, that table gets turned 180 degrees. As a commercial working photographer, 95% of what I do is the business. 5% of what I do is clicking the shutter. And that's no lie.
So can you talk about, so after you graduated and then you started getting into the business, so can you talk about a particularly challenging or a tough project that you came up against, and how you managed?
After my studio managing stint, I really worked for a couple of great photographers, and after 2 years, they basically kicked me out of the nest. They said, get out of here and do it yourself, which was really great to have. The biggest challenge for me, quite honestly, is not the job. It's not a visual production. The biggest challenge, and I think this is the way for most of us in the creative industry, is getting the gig. And so, the biggest challenge is finding the clients, massaging the clients, getting the gig through the door. And at the time, it was just a matter of a lot of cold calling, a lot of going and showing your portfolio, a lot of being pleasantly persistent. And that's a fine line between, reaching out to people and becoming a pest, versus being pleasantly persistent. And a couple of my clients, I mean, I had one client in particular that I ended up shooting for 20 years, for 2 decades. I shot for him. And the first job he gave me, he told me, he goes, the reason I hired you for this is because, he may not have used those exact words, but the gist of it was because you were pleasantly persistent. I would continually reach out in an inobtrusive fashion, reminding him that I was around. Here's some of my latest work. Would love to work with you. And just doing it hopefully in a non-annoying way. And eventually there came a project that was appropriate. He used me for the project, and then from that point on, he used me for almost every other project that he did. He was a graphic designer and did a lot of annual reports in the financial industry. And so again, we had a very long-standing relationship from that. So I mean, that's always the toughest nut to crack, is to get the job through the door. What really kind of, I think, I felt was a turning point for me, again, out of a cold call, I went and showed my portfolio at an ad agency here in LA. And I just clicked with the art director. So much of what we do, I think even more so now, is relationship based. It really is about building a personal relationship. There are a ton of us out there. I mean, photographers, I don't want to say dime a dozen, but everybody wants to be a photographer. And so there are a lot of selling points. Certainly you have to know how to run a production from front to back. And you have to know your lighting, composition, and storytelling. But beyond that, it's the personal relationships. And so I went and did a cold call, showed my portfolio to an art director at this ad agency. He took a chance on me. He did first time working with me, and we did an ad campaign for Cigna Healthcare, where we went up to San Francisco and we were doing what's called a piggyback, which is where you shoot a print campaign simultaneously while they're shooting a commercial campaign. And so you're using the same talent as the commercial crew. And more often than not, when you're piggybacking, it may feel like you're second fiddle. It's just a fact of life that a commercial production has a much higher budget than a print production. And so they kind of get first grab at the candy, and you might get sloppy seconds, or, you might get some good solid time with talent and locations, et cetera. And we pulled off a really good campaign. It actually won a couple of awards. And that was kind of what I felt was my transition from trying to get into the industry to actually doing that kind of work.
Right. Now, you mentioned awards. Is that something that you find that you go for?
I don't particularly shoot for awards. That's not ever what's front of mind for me. And to be quite honest, I did not personally start entering competitions, oh God, until maybe 10, no, probably even more than that, probably 15 years into my career. I just, right. Self-esteem thing. I just never thought, my stuff's not up to caliber, and I just didn't do it. And I had a couple colleagues that really kind of prompted me to start entering competitions. And, now I just kind of do it as a matter of course. There are, there's dozens of competitions out there. The interesting thing is that I have found, at least for me, that my work is suited to particular competitions. So while I might enter 6, 8, 12 competitions a year, I pretty predictably know which ones I might, gain some notoriety out of. And there's others where, I've entered, year after year, and I just never even get brought up. So it's just interesting that even your style of photography can be suited to a particular award series, and maybe not others. But like I say, these days there's a handful of them that I just regularly enter. Some of them I enter because they are part of organizations that I like to support. And so my entry fees go to supporting those entities. And others, again, it's a thing of, it's like, oh, I usually get something out of this. So it's about a PR thing. It's about getting my work, even if I don't win, if I'm getting my work in front of judges that are relevant judges, it's another way to remind those creatives that I'm out there producing work.
Great idea. That's fantastic. And I know that you have a specific style. Just looking at like what was the one there's one called, forgive me, Daddy's Chicken Shack. The
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Like those pictures are amazing. The texture, the color, it feels like it can grab it right off the screen. And so that style, that very illustrative kind of like punchy kind of style, I love it. And I can see you in like communication arts, graphic design magazine, things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, there's two sides to that particular style. I'll tell you that um, my current style, really the way I'm shooting these days, I don't feel I came into my own until around 2010. Um, I was very much what I had a good friend who was an agent. She was never my agent, but she was an agent, and she called me the executor because anybody could hand me a layout and I would get that into a photograph for them. I'm very adept at that, but I didn't have a lot to say myself. I had not found my voice. I had not found my narrative. I had not found my visual style. And it really came during the recession, the 2008, 9, 10 recession, where I sat down with my retoucher, who's the only retoucher I've ever used my whole career. Good friend of mine, used to be a student of mine. She assisted me for a while, and now she's an incredible retoucher. And we sat down and just said, what can we do? It's super slow. What can we do? Let's start playing and let's figure something out. And that's ultimately when I started to develop my visual style. And that, when I came out of Art Center, even though I thought I was shooting fashion, some things happened and I definitely did not go down that route. The fashion thing lasted a couple of years and I really determined that it was not the avenue I wanted to pursue. But I became a generalist, which is kind of a nasty word in photography. Everybody wants you to specialize in a particular genre.
Right.
And I can't get away from being a generalist because I enjoy shooting different things. I enjoy the variety of it. And for me, my mentality is whatever's in front of the lens, it's a product, whether it's a car, a plate of food, a still life, or a fashion model. To me, it's a product.
Mhm.
And so what comes into play are those three mantras that I always use personally. It's lighting, composition, and storytelling. You can apply that to any image. And if you apply all three of those well, I'm going to bet that you're going to get a successful image out of it. And so again, it's like these days, my work is kind of mixed between a quirky humor conceptual genre, or I'm just doing a lot of food these days because it's just coming to me. But regardless of what it is, it's my visual interpretation of the imagery that kind of makes it mine. So people will say, oh, well, he kind of does a little bit of everything, but we can always tell when it's Dana's shot because of the way the visual style that's attached to it. Just to tell you why that Daddy's Chicken Shack feels so, crunchy and textural and like you can grab it is because I'm using a process called focus stacking, which some people may or may not have heard, but it is a process by which where we all know we can take our iPhone and go, shoot a bunch of pictures left to right and stitch them together in post-production to create a panoramic. Focus stacking goes the other direction. It goes front to back. So when we're doing focus stacking, which is what, the main image, I know what you're talking about, looks so incredibly realistic is because it's shot this way. And we take a series of images, changing the focal plane for each image. So focusing here, then focusing here, then focusing here, so that each subsequent image gets a slice that's super crisp and sharp, no fall off. And then in post-production, we stitch those together to create this hyper sharp, super textural image. And I'm doing a lot of that these days. Anything that's not people oriented, I'm usually focus stacking because it has that particular look.
Wow, that's wild. I've never heard of that before. That's fantastic. I would love to see that process.
If you're enjoying this video, please take a moment to hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you.
Well, okay, so as I'm looking through your portfolio, I noticed a couple of case studies that caught my eye. I'd like to know if you could tell me, well, obviously you could, but so could you please enlighten me on the difference between the projects, such as, how do you approach a documentary, say, like 14 Days, which was a great, I watched the video, where you were talking about that. It's a really great concept. But it's a documentary, so it's very different than dealing with commercial project like Daddy's Chicken Shack or United Healthcare,
Very much
right?
so.
So what's your approach? What's the difference between those two?
Well, with the commercial work, again, most of my clients are coming to me with a pretty specific end product that they want to execute. So my executor comes into play, and I'm able to do that. Now, one of the case studies, again, a commercial project was Lowe's Home Improvement. And that one was really great because the creative team was open to a collaboration. They weren't coming with fully executed layouts saying, here, just produce this. They really wanted me to interject, my 2 cents into the project. They had, it was for something called a movers campaign, it was just a series of images that was trying to promote how Lowe's Home Improvement is there for people who are moving, regardless of what the issue was. And so, they were looking to me to be very stylistically involved. I can't control that, whether a client's going to come to me for that or not. Most times they want me to put my visual spin on it. But as far as the concept, that's a crapshoot as to whether or not they want me involved. The documentary project that I did was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done photographically, because it really took me out of my comfort zone. I am a control freak. And it's when we're on set, number one, we have a lot of fun. I make every production really fun, but I'm pretty buttoned up. We've got everything prepared beforehand. My producer that I've worked with now for 15 years, we work hand in glove to make sure, everything's taken care of before we step on set, and it just kind of goes seamlessly. The photojournalism, the documentary project that I did, I had no control. So I was out of my element completely. The concept of it was they had done one in America, and the one that I did, I met the producer of that project after they had finished what they call the 14 Days in America, and they were getting ready to do 14 Days in Great Britain. And at the time, it was post 9/11. They were doing both still portraits and video interviews of people, asking them questions. And the goal of the project overall was ultimately to say, regardless of who you are, where you live, what your economic status might be, at the root of things, we all have the same concerns and the same worries and the same loves and very universal emotions, regardless of all of these extraneous things that do make us different. But at the heart of it, we all have a commonality. And so they had done the American project. They were getting ready to do the 14-day project. They had a photographer on the project that was doing very Richard Avedon white seamless on location portraits. But the producer said, we'd like you to come and do environmental portraits. So while we're in this one space, filming the video interviews and filming the on white portraits, we'd like you to go around the neighborhood where we're at and photograph portraits of people in that community. And boy, it was, again, one of the toughest things I did because it was so out of my toolkit. And what we did was we were in 14 cities across the entire nation in 14 days. So we would shoot, get up at 6 a.m, go out, we'd shoot all day, pack all of our equipment up, drive to another city, get a few hours sleep, and do it all over again. And so we went from the Isles of Northern Scotland all the way down to London, 14 cities in 14 days, including a jump over to Ireland. And during that project, I shot over 600 portraits of just people on the streets. And about halfway through it, I was shooting a portrait of a very old woman. So I'm 7 days into this, sleep deprived, and again, just uncomfortable. I literally, after the first or second day, came back to our location and said, I don't feel like I'm getting anything here. I just feel like I'm not producing anything. Right. And my colleagues are going, you're crazy. I mean, you're not seeing this stuff for what it is. And on the 7th day, we are in Wales, and I am really tired. I don't want to shoot anymore. But I see this woman walking in front of a church, and she's got the brightest yellow coat on. And I go, I can't not photograph. She's just like, it's like a perfect scene. I've got to shoot her. Right. So I went over, and she was well into her late 80s, if not early 90s. And I asked if I could take her photograph, and she said, of course. And I did a series of photos with her. And after each person, we were having them sign a model release for this project. And I had a college intern that was my assistant, and he was handling the model releases. And so we walk up to her and say, would you be okay signing a model release? And she goes, of course. And she goes to sign it, and she kind of stops, and she turns to us and says, can you help me? I've forgotten how to spell my name. Oh. And it's like, because I was so kind of like broken down from the, tears started coming from my eyes. These people were being so generous and so real. And we only got, 5 minutes with them at most. But it was just, I came back, told the producer, I never want to do anything like that ever again. Don't even ask me. I'm done with it. I didn't look at the imagery for 3 months. And finally, when I did start to look at it, I started to see the value in it. And 6 months later, they talked about doing another project. I said, oh, sign me up. I'm all over it.
Wow. That's amazing. You're really touching people, getting right close to them, but you only have such a short time. Yeah.
Right.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
What a great project. Have you done anything similar to that or anything like that after that? Because that was a while ago, right?
That was 2011. And we were supposed to go to both China and Russia to do the series there. And we had, at one point, we had some major corporations that were going to be funding it. And when push came to shove and politics came up, both of those ended up getting canceled. And so while best laid plans, we weren't able to continue the project.
Right. You were at ArtCenter as a student. What prompted you to want to go back there and actually teach?
Yeah, I graduated, I hesitate to even say, I graduated in 86. And usually I think ArtCenter, I think they said they won't let anybody come back and teach until they've been out for 5 years. But they had recently started a program called Saturday High, which was classes in all the various degrees that they offer for high school level students. And this was kind of the beginning of their, they had Saturday High, they had ArtCenter at night, all of those kind of conglomerated into becoming what is now known as ArtCenter Extension. So it's all their extension courses for non-degree people that want to come in and take a course. At the time, they had a course for every single major except photography. And I went into one of the admins that I knew, and I said, you guys are offering a course for everything except photography for Saturday High. And they're like, yeah. I said, let me teach it. And they said, well, we don't usually let people come back, because this was only 2 years after I graduated. Oh, and they didn't like the optics of that. And I said, you got anybody else that's going to teach it? And they're like, no. I said, let me teach it. And so that's how I started teaching. Yeah. From there, I did teach the basics of photography for all of the non-photo majors. So a lot of the other disciplines take a photo class to get a basic understanding of photography so that they know how to converse with photographers when they're doing a professional gig. And so I taught that class for several years. took a little bit of time off, and then I taught. I became very passionate about using Adobe Lightroom, and there was no class in that. So I requested to teach a course, which was kind of a combo course. It was basics of photography in Adobe Lightroom, and digital asset management. And I also taught a course on the collaborative process about a photographer and an art director working together. So that was a cross-discipline course where either major could take that to kind of see how that working relationship works. And these days, like I said, I'm teaching the business of photography, because again, it's something I'm very passionate about. It's something that we don't get a lot of information about, and so I'm just kind of passionate about sharing what information I have in regards to everything that we do as photographers besides clicking the shutter.
Right. Excellent. Okay, great. So I read that. So I'm sorry. Let me say that again. In your resume, you mentioned the group. You don't have a lot of information on that, so I had to go back. I did a lot of research, and I found out what a great program, a collective of professional photographers that essentially, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you band together and you basically work together to get gigs. Is that pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily to get gigs. The impetus for us forming this cooperative was that before COVID, really a lot, the paradigm for getting work was doing cold calls, having face-to-face meetings with ad agencies, design firms, marketing directors at corporations, and showing them our work. That's how we, get ourselves in front of people to be able to get gigs. These days, COVID changed that a bit. And actually, we started this slightly before COVID because the paradigm was shifting. And companies like the Workbook, AdEdge, Boulevard, which is LA PhotoWorks, New York PhotoWorks, APA, they would all do what are called portfolio reviews, which is they would gather a bunch of creatives, charge the photographers for the opportunity to sit down for 15, 20 minutes with a number of creatives and show our portfolio. And so these were paid processes where we could get ourselves in front of those same people, because it was becoming more and more difficult to get a show as an individual photographer at an ad agency. If you think about it, more and more art directors, creative directors, they're doing more and more work and they only have so many hours, and they were already overloaded. And the paradigm of, hey, I want to come in as Dana Hursey and show your creative team my portfolio. They're like, we're going to gather a dozen people in a room, take them away from their work for 15, 20 minutes, even an hour, to look at a photographer's work. It's a big ask. And so it was becoming very, very difficult for photographers to do those portfolio shows or those cold calls. And, it just wasn't happening. And so the concept of the group was to form a cooperative of, we've fluctuated between 5 and 8 photographers, and one of our photographers is actually a husband and wife team. But it makes it more appealing when we reach out to an agency and say, hey, we would like to show you some portfolios, but you're not just seeing one photographer, you're seeing half a dozen photographers, and they're all different kinds of photographers. So there's a food photographer, a lifestyle photographer, a car photographer, a product photographer. And all of a sudden that becomes appealing because now it's more productive for the agency. It's like, great, for this, we can see it's worthwhile to block out an hour, open up our conference room, you guys set up all your portfolios, and people can just kind of file through, meet you, and see the work. The big thing is that, a creative can see your work anytime they want. They can just go to your website. So really the point of these meetings, even the portfolio reviews that all the different entities do, it's not so much about seeing the work. They can see that very easily online. It's about the face-to-face meeting and again, creating that relationship, because what most people want to see is Dana somebody that I want to go spend 12 hours in a studio with? What's his demeanor like? And if we're on set with him for 4 days, am I going to want to shoot myself at the end of the 4 days, or are we going to have a fantastic time? And they can't get that by looking at my website. We might have some behind the scenes videos and stuff like that where I might look fun and engaging, but what they want is they want to meet the photographer so that they can instill some confidence in themselves that, oh, this is somebody I can work with. This is somebody that can execute. This is somebody that can collaborate. And so again, the whole point of the group was to make it more appealing to get those shows because the agency is being more efficient with their time.
I see. So have you been working with the same group of people since the beginning?
We've had a couple people step off and we've had a couple people step on. So there's one out of right now I think right now we're 5. We're looking to potentially add some people to the group. We find our sweet spot is around 6 to 8. And there's 5 of us right now, and 1, 2, 3, 3 of us are from the beginning.
Wow. Okay. Great. I actually have about one last question.
Sure.
We've made it to the end. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So now I watched your presentation, I think it was about 2 years ago. You did a presentation at the Projections event. I think that's what it was called.
Yep.
And you talked about finding your voice. And you earlier in our conversation, you mentioned finding your voice. What advice would you give new photographers about finding their style?
Yeah. And again, I go back to saying what I said earlier is that everybody's got a different path. I see, I saw some of my colleagues that I'd mentioned that were getting gigs before they even graduated from ArtCenter. And what I saw is that they peaked and then they crashed, a couple of years after graduation, just kind of popularity wise. I've always wanted a steady trajectory upwards. And, sometimes I'd like that to move a little faster than it does. The advice I give, a couple different things, is cut yourself some slack. It comes to you when it comes to you. And I found mine at a low point. It's like, the tough times might be the thing that forces you to do something that you wouldn't do otherwise. And that's ultimately how my path ended up. It was tough times and I had to figure out something else. And that's what allowed me to maybe push beyond my comfort zone and try something different. And the floodgates kind of opened after that. But my big advice that I always tell anybody who's in this industry is you've got to be passionate about it. There are so many times, unfortunately, in my career where things were not going well. And I just want to go get a 9-to-5 regular paycheck. Can I please just go do that? And there was something inside of me that wouldn't let me do it. I've had those before I got into photography. I had a regular paycheck job. So I know what that's like, but there is something in my gut that will not let me do anything else. And even during those toughest times, during the recession, really, those were the worst times of my career. What that showed me, beyond pushing me to do something stylistically different, it proved to me that there was nothing else that I wanted to do. I love what I do. I have yet to, it's not that I'm not open to it. I have yet to come across anything else that I have any interest in or any passion about. And so my big advice is you've got to be passionate about this because it is a roller coaster. I don't care who you are. I've never met anybody who has not had ups and downs in this industry. Slow period, sometimes someone's busy and the other guy's slow. And then it flips and then she's slow and he's busy. So if you don't have the passion to be able to weather the tough times, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. Just don't do this because you are absolutely guaranteed to have down times and you need that passion to be able to carry you through those tough times and get through to the other side. There will be an up after you have a down, but I have found that it's only my passion for it that allows me to hang on through those tough times.
Excellent. Well, that's fantastic advice. I feel that's the same in a lot of industries and graphic design for sure.
Yeah.
I absolutely can relate to that. Well, thank you so much. Once again, this has been wonderful. I could go on and on and on, and I really appreciate your time. And
been my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.